Kimi K3 outputs tokens nearly twice as fast as Grok 4.5, clocking 163 versus 90 tokens per second, but Grok 4.5 costs 60% less per million output tokens. $6 versus 15, and that gap changes a lot depending on what you're actually building. Both models dropped recently and teams are picking right now, so the timing on this matters. I pulled data across 5 real tests covering speed, context, accuracy, pricing, and multimodal support, from 17 verified sources with 0 vendor spin. And honestly, what surprised me most was one specific capability that only one of these models has, and if your workflow needs it, the choice is basically made for you before you even look at the numbers. Alright, so if you're a developer or a team routing production traffic through an API, this comparison is for you. Pick the wrong model and you're either paying 2.5 times too much per token, or you're hitting a context ceiling that forces you to chunk documents and lose coherence, and both of those hurt. Test 1 is real-time reasoning speed. When a model is slow, your users feel it, and in agentic pipelines, where one model call feeds the next, a slow engine compounds across every step and blows up your total runtime. The output speed gap here is pretty clean. Kimi K3 hit 163.6 tokens per second on fireworks, while Grok 4.5 came in around 90, and those are independent measurements, not vendor claims. First token latency is basically a wash though, 13.32 seconds versus 13.8 seconds, well, within margin of error. Take the output speed comparison with a grain of salt, though. Kimi K3 runs in an always-on thinking mode, so it's doing reasoning work before it ever starts streaming. And Grok 4.5's reasoning latency is measured differently, around 19.4 seconds to produce 500 tokens in high reasoning mode, which makes a direct apples-to-apples comparison pretty tricky. I was expecting first token latency to be the differentiator, but it's really the sustained output rate where Kimi K3 pulls away. Nearly twice the tokens per second on optimized providers is hard to ignore, so Kimi K3 takes speed, and that puts it 1-0 in this comparison. Test 2 is long context processing. When your context window is too small, you start chunking, and chunking breaks coherence, so you lose the thread across a long codebase or a 300-page document. The model starts hallucinating connections that aren't there, and you end up doing way more cleanup work than you planned. Looking at the published specs, the gap is just massive. Kimi K3 supports 148,576 tokens, a full 1 million, while Grok 4.5 caps at 500,000. Kimi also supports automatic context caching, which can cut costs on repeated queries, and there's no public data on whether Grok 4.5 has caching at all, so I'm leaving that unverified. Honestly, I expected Grok 4.5 to be closer here, but it's not even close. Double the context window is a real structural advantage, a pretty meaningful one, so Kimi K3 takes long context processing and moves the score to 2-0. Test 3 is factual accuracy and citations. When a model hallucinates a source or drifts on a long research task, you don't always catch it, and the downstream cost of shipping a report with a made-up citation or an agent acting on a wrong fact is way higher than any API bill. What I found is that both models have documented issues and there's no clean head-to-head data to call a winner. Kimi K3 can drift on citation reliability during long research tasks. Grok 4.5 has a flagged high hallucination rate from independent analysts, and neither one is ranked definitively better on accuracy right now. I was expecting one of them to have a clear edge, but the data just isn't there to call it either way. Both have real hallucination concerns, and no verified head-to-head benchmark exists, so this one's a tie. Score stays at Kimi K3 2, Grok 4.5 0, with 1 tied. Test 4 is API pricing and token efficiency. If you're running high-volume text workloads, token cost is your unit economics, and picking the wrong model can mean your monthly API bill is 2 or 3 times higher than it needs to be, which compounds fast at scale. So here's what the pricing data actually shows. Kimi K3 charges $15 per $1 million output tokens. Grok 4.5 charges $6, which is a 60% difference, and on a blended effective cost, using a realistic cache-heavy usage ratio, Kimi K3 comes out at 2.31 per million, versus Grok 4.5 at 1.35, still a meaningful gap. I was expecting Kimi's context caching to close the gap more, but even after accounting for caching, Grok 4.5 is still about 40% cheaper on a blended basis. Grok 4.5 wins pricing, and that pulls the score to Kimi K3 2. Grok 4.5 won, with 1 still tied. Test 5 is multimodal input support. If your pipeline needs to process video and your model can't handle it natively, you're bolting on a separate vision model, paying twice, and adding a point of failure, which means extra latency, extra cost, and extra complexity you didn't budget for. Both models handle text and images natively, so that's a tie, but Kimi K3 also supports native video input. Grok 4.5 does not. Neither model supports audio, so that's another tie, and the video gap is really the one that matters here. Now, to be fair, if you're not doing any video analysis, this dimension doesn't move the needle for you at all. Text and image support is identical between the two, so the video advantage is real, but it's only a differentiator if video is actually part of what you're processing, and a lot of teams just aren't there yet. I figured multimodal would be closer, but native video support is a clear capability gap, and Grok 4.5 simply can't process video files without a separate model. Kimi K3 takes multimodal, and that closes the comparison at Kimi K3 3, Grok 4.5 won, with 1 tied. Alright, so where does Kimi K3 win? Output speed, 163 tokens per second versus 90. Context window, 1 million tokens versus 500,000, literally double. Native video input that Grok 4.5 just doesn't have. And automatic context caching that can cut costs on repeated queries. Those are 4 concrete, verified advantages. And where does Grok 4.5 win? Pricing, full stop. $6 per million output tokens versus 15, and on a blended effective cost, 1.35 versus 2.31 per million tokens. That's roughly 40% cheaper even after you factor in caching. So for high-volume text workloads, that cost difference adds up really fast. I went into this expecting pricing to be closer than it is, and it's not. 15 versus 6 is a real gap. So the decision rule is pretty straightforward. If you need long documents, video input, or raw throughput speed, Kimi K3 is the pick. But if you're running high-volume text tasks and cost per token is what keeps you up at night, Grok 4.5 at $6 per million wins.